we can quiet down, that would be great. And the sooner we are quiet, the sooner our special guest can start speaking here. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Hello, everyone here and in our live stream audience brought to you by Fenwick and West. Thanks for joining us. My name is Alexa Lee. I work on communications here at StartX. Just to run through a couple things for you today for our program. If you have any questions, you can pose them to the speaker through our site, qa.founder.center. Write in your question and also feel free to upvote any questions that interest you. You can also use Twitter to follow this conversation. Our hashtag for this event is #WhatsApp_StartX, and we are at StartX. If you are a journalist online watching, we will have photography available for you shortly after the event. Just email me and I'll get back to you. We are really excited to bring you this special program here today at our brand new 13,000 square foot headquarters in Palo Alto, California. This also closes out OpenX, which is an experimental initiative that is student-centered, designed to share the StartX resources with the greater Stanford community. OpenX was generously supported by Wilmer Hale. It was also supported by our staff and founders and mentors, people that helped bring these resources to them. There was a workshop called Working at a Startup, as well as StartX Med Day. OpenX involved about 1,400 students, faculty, and working professionals. Did any of you attend an OpenX event? All right, so should we do it again? I hope so. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you the founder of StartX, Cameron Titleman. Cameron started StartX in 2009 when he was when he was a junior at Stanford. He felt the great need very strongly that a nonprofit was the best structure to help support high caliber Stanford-affiliated entrepreneurs. Since then, we've supported more than 370 founders building 166 companies who have raised over $349 million. Applause for all our founders, please. Also with us today, our special guest, Brian Acton of WhatsApp. Thanks so much for coming out today, Brian. Brian is the co-founder of WhatsApp. His company has reached some amazing milestones this year. They sold to Facebook in February and shortly after crossed the 500 million user mark. He has been programming since the 6th grade with the TRS-80 Model 4. He grew up in Central Florida. He came out west and graduated from Stanford in 1994 with a degree in computer science. He spent close to a decade in engineering roles at Yahoo. Eventually, he left the company, paving the way to start WhatsApp.
All right, Brian, so you have your Stanford hat on, so I thought we would start with that. So this actually isn't actually really widely known from a lot of Stanford students that you're from Stanford. When I tell them, hey, like the WhatsApp founders from Stanford, like, oh, whoa, that's so cool. Because, every other chat app or, Snapchat and Instagram and it's all kind of Stanford people. So I'd love to start and talk about Stanford and your experience there.
Sure.
And maybe, if there's like, what initially brought you to Stanford? Like, why did you decide to come? Because you were initially at another university and you transferred over. So can you tell us about that story?
Absolutely. The little known fact is I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I started there, and growing up in Florida, Floridians don't really know much about the West Coast, right? It all comes from media, it all comes from television. Never even heard of Stanford growing up. That's how unknown Stanford was to me. And so my preference was, okay, go to an Ivy League school, and Ivy League school with an engineering program. So there were only a couple choices there. I think it was Princeton and Penn. And so I chose the University of Pennsylvania. So I get there, I get to the University of Pennsylvania, and I run into all these California kids, and they're like, hey, yeah, I applied to Stanford, I didn't get in, and I came here. Or they tell me these stories about how great Stanford is, how great a school it is. And oh, by the way, it's in Silicon Valley, and the heart of computers and Apple and everything else. So during the course of my freshman year in college, I gave some serious thought about transferring. I applied to Stanford, got into Stanford, and my mom said, you can't go. Because my mom also had not heard of Stanford. So I got really, really, really lucky. And the reason I got lucky is our next door neighbors in the development that we lived in were from California, and they took my mom aside and they're like, no, you want to send your kid to Stanford. And they helped convince my mom, and sure enough, I was able to go to Stanford starting my sophomore year. Had a great experience there, lived in Stern, lived in Lagunita, dabbled in Double E a little bit, but landed in computer science, and had a great experience.
Just so I have some context in the room, can anyone raise their hand who's a current Stanford student or alum? All right, so a big Stanford contingent here. What about just a current student? Okay, nice. So I think a lot of people are curious when they go to Stanford. And I remember I was an undergrad at Stanford, and I tried to figure out as I was building my company, what things were actually valuable there. And you went, you were there, in what years in the early 90s. So while you were at Stanford, what parts of it, professors or classes, really influenced what you did later on, and you think ultimately helped out with some of your success at WhatsApp?
The classes I think that had the best influence on me were the project classes. I mentioned that I took CS 240A, the operating systems class. I did horribly in it. I basically failed it. I got a C. And Mendel Rosenblum taught the class. But the part that I benefited from was having gone through the exercise and the learning of, what does it mean to build an operating system, all the way from the ground up. And I had a similar experience with the compilers class. David Dill taught that class. And that one I got an A in, thankfully. So I wasn't all an idiot, but all these project classes were very hands-on for me, and I felt that with hands-on learning, I did the best. The theory classes I did okay in. I didn't do great in. The predicate logic class, I think it was CS 157 when I took it. There was another big C, right? It was like, But maybe it was because it wasn't applied to me, and I enjoyed the applied classes more. And by doing those applied classes, it was the beginnings of my career. Because, I could take what I learned in these classes and then immediately apply them in industry. It helped me get internships. I interned at Apple my junior year. It helped me get jobs subsequently. I'm different in the sense that I didn't go straight to a startup after college. I went and worked in industry for many years. My experience at Stanford and the education that I got at Stanford was a great foundation.
So what about professors? Were there any professors that particularly stood out, or your favorite professors and stuff and guidance they gave you that helped you in your career?
The CS professors I remember the best. I actually had a class with Rajiv Matwani. He was a great influence. Taught the class CS, I think 154, very well. It was very sad to hear about his passing. Is one. David Dill, of course, I mentioned already. I had some of my early classes with Nick Parlante, who I believe is still here, and he was also my advisor. I had a great, I think I took CS 107 with him. Sorry, the courses have been renumbered, and so I don't always know.
Still there.
Yeah, 107 is still there.
People spend like 40 hours a week on it.
Yeah, and Maggie Johnson. Some great instructors. I never got to take 106 with Eric Roberts. I missed that because of my first year at Penn. I've heard he's a great instructor. Friends have told me about him as an instructor and as well as a mentor. But I can't name a bad CS prof, honestly. I had a great experience with the CS profs, and they were sort of stellar, first-rate teachers.
So it's funny that actually we didn't talk about this before, but Rajiv was actually the advisor, one of the 3 advisors for us when we started, like in the last year of his life, and he was an amazing mentor.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit maybe about what him or another professor, like the guidance they gave you, or things that they said that might have affected how you led your career? Rajiv, for all of you that don't know, this guy Rajiv Mawani was a prolific guy. He was advisor and mentor to hundreds and hundreds of startups and students at Stanford.
As well as Google.
A huge impact. And Google, yes, of course.
Yeah. I don't know if there was any single expression, except Rajiv used to refer to the pumping lemma in a weird accented voice. But no, I think that, if anything, the Stanford professors were patient with me insofar as taking the time to explain concepts in a way that I was able to understand them and really learn a lot. Because as I mentioned, I started programming in the 6th grade. But what I lacked in the 6th grade or in 7th grade and later was the foundations, right? I was more of a self-taught programmer. So yeah, I could code something up, but I didn't have a good root understanding of everything. And what I got from Stanford and all the professors involved was a good sort of foundation of computer science, all the way from the bottom. Building computers in E50 and WE181 in those classes was fun too. I just had a lot of fun. Right?
Yeah. So on that, I remember my early CS classes at Stanford, and what they would say is, we're not here to teach you how to be a hacker. We're here to teach you how to be a computer scientist. Yeah. And so how important was that fundamental computer science theory and versus a lot of people now who are just saying, I'm not going to take that whole core, and I'm going to focus more on the higher level programming?
I would tell you that it's critically important. Most importantly, data structures algorithms, CS161, big O notation, things like that. Every interview that you may ever go in industry is going to ask you questions about big O, as an example. First order predicate logic is a little bit out there. I'd say that's not as close to industry. But when you're talking about natural language processing and understanding what the scope of what languages can do, and that's what you learn about in CS154, directly applicable. So these theory classes are almost as important, if not as important, to all these project classes.
And when you were a student, did you join a startup? Did you think about doing a startup? What was entrepreneurship like at the time that you were at Stanford?
Because now it's crazy. Everyone wants to build a company. You have tons of these classes about entrepreneurship, tons of project classes. So yeah, what was it like then?
So I graduated 20 years ago. I'm actually celebrating my 20-year reunion this year. It was a very different time. If you remember, in 1989 there was a stock market crash. So a lot of the nation was pulling back in terms of, and so there was a lot less investment in startups at the time. So a lot of myself and my peers, we were all pursuing industry jobs. Friends that went to go work at Oracle, Adobe, Apple, name brand tech firms that existed in the Bay Area. Cisco existed back then, Sun. Going to a startup, only one of my friends actually did that. A friend of mine went and was a co-founder at Excite, the search engine, if you guys remember that. So, true story. So entrepreneurship and really taking these risks immediately after graduation was much and was part of WhatsApp. I was 38 at the time. I mean, much older founder than your standard founders, I think. As the years, over the last 10 years especially, I think there's been a lot of interest in spurring innovation with accelerator programs, and I think it's amazing. I think it's awesome, because this is where I think a lot of all this innovation comes from, and I find it exciting.
So talking about that, so you aren't the classic profile of the social mobile, startup founder, the guy who dropped out of Stanford type thing. So for all the founders and students who are building companies right out of school, do you have any advice about the differences between going to a company, getting some experiences, and how having that industry experience actually helped you in building WhatsApp?
For me, having industry experience was beyond important. It gave me a lot of confidence to tackle a lot of hard problems. It also gave me a good, broad understanding of business in general. When you start a company, you think to yourself, oh, I'm just going to build a product. But it turns out when you start a company, you also have to worry about things like contracts and legal. You got to worry about HR and vacation plans, and you have to worry about a lot of these peripheral things, some of which are quite important to your employees. You also have to worry about compensation. You have to worry about stock plans. You have to worry about paying bills on time. Things that you may not think about when you're like, just jump into it and I'm going to build a product. But it's important. So having worked in industry gave me a broad understanding of how business worked. It was my essential business school training, right? Was working in industry for 10 years. I got to understand how business works, how all the different parts of businesses work, and it goes beyond just simply the product and the technology, which is what a lot of people start out with. It's like, oh, I'm just going to build some technology and everything else will fall into place. It doesn't always happen that way. I think a second part, though, was I had some fantastic mentors during my career. When I worked at Apple, I worked with some pretty experienced guys, and I learned a lot of tech from them. Industry tech, practice, that worked in practice. And so I'm grateful to them, some of the guys that I worked with at Apple and some of the guys that I worked with at Yahoo. Jan and I worked at Yahoo together for 10 years, and we gained a lot of experience in dealing with large-scale systems. Hundreds of servers, managing hundreds of servers, waking up in the middle of the night and fixing servers and stuff like that. No one wants to do it, right? But we did it, and we had the experience doing it. And that's the only thing you get from working in these large companies. Otherwise, you end up doing it by the seat of your pants. You make a lot more mistakes, and you have a harder time scaling and growing your company beyond a couple hundred users. So for me, the experience and the background on the technical side and then developing a broad understanding of the business landscape was extraordinarily helpful.
So after you were working in industry, tell us how you started working on WhatsApp.
Well, I took 2 years off. So at the end of 2007, I'd worked at Yahoo for 11 and a half years, and I decided it was about time. I had finished this very big project at Yahoo, and it was a good time for me to leave Yahoo on a good note. And so I took time off, and ironically, so did Jan. Jan, my co-founder, is Jan Koum, for those that don't know. He and I both quit Yahoo basically on the same day, November 1st, 2007.
Is that coordinated?
Yes, we called each other up that morning, and no, it was just more coincidental than anything. And so he and I, we did separate things. We both traveled a little bit. I got to travel to Antarctica. It was a great experience. Argentina, and then also I lived in New York for a little while. So I really took some time off, to gain some experience just in life itself. But what I found after that first year was I wanted to be back. And so I jumped in, and in 2008, I came back to the Bay Area, and I was like, okay, let's find something next to do. And ironically, I did talk to Twitter. I did talk to Facebook. Unfortunately, that became very public with some tweets that I did. Thankfully, there was nothing negative in them, so I got very lucky there. But I had some good interviewing experiences, but nothing gelled. And so Jan had gotten involved in WhatsApp, what I call sort of the 1.0 version of WhatsApp. When he pivoted and started working on messaging, which I call the 2.0, that's when I jumped in. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do this. And I pitched in my own capital, my own savings, and then I also worked for free for several years as a co-founder, and we continued to sort of grow the business from then.
In those 2 years off, the year and a half, 2 years, what value do you think that provided? Because there's a lot of people who are leaving their companies or leaving school and they immediately want to do something rather than taking that time off. So would you suggest other people do that? And if so, for what reason?
I think it depends on what part of life you're in. So I was in my late 30s or mid 30s. I was recently divorced. It was a good time for me to take time off. And for people that are maybe younger, I think it's okay to take a month off. Taking 12 months off or 24 months off, that's a lot. It's a big drain on your savings, and it puts a lot of uncertainty into your life. I think if you've got something that you're interested in doing, maybe take a month or two off, recharge, and jump into it. While you're young, especially because you have the energy to do it, do it. When you get older, it gets a little bit harder, I'll tell you that. Waking up in the middle of the night to fix servers gets harder, that type of stuff. But yeah, would I recommend everyone take 2 years off? No. Would I recommend everyone take 2 to 3 months off? Yeah. I think it's a good way to recharge.
And while you were at Yahoo, were there any particular insights that these mentors gave you or lessons you learned that were fundamentally important and impactful when you were building WhatsApp?
Certainly the technical side. As I mentioned, large-scale server management is something you learn, you cut your teeth on at these companies. And Facebook has this, Google has this, many of these companies deal with these issues of large-scale systems. I think I also learned a lot from some great guys. I worked with Chi Lu for many years. Chi is over at Bing at Microsoft. He's a great guy. I learned a lot from him. He's brilliant. He was just incredibly smart and very insightful. And so you learn. It's hard to describe what you learn, but you learn a lot about leadership and management from these guys that maybe have done it before you. I worked with Zad Nazem, who was the CTO of Yahoo for many years. I worked with David Filo for many years, and so I these guys were my mentors from that time, and you learn about leadership. You learn both sides of it too. You learn what's good and what works, and you learn what's bad and doesn't work. And so you try to learn from that and incorporate that into your next step in life, building a new company, right?
In the early days of WhatsApp, how did you explain or even justify what you were doing then to friends and family, to people who didn't get it, to people who didn't have the vision? You said you worked years for free. A lot of sacrifices there where people must have said, you should go back to working for a bigger company. What was that like?
I have to be honest with you. I think we had the hardest time explaining it to people in the United States. If you look at what our product is, and it resonated, I think, the earliest in Europe. And so for some of you that don't know, WhatsApp provides phone number-based messaging. And you think to yourself, well, isn't that what SMS is? And exactly, that is what SMS is. But SMS is expensive, it's antiquated, and what WhatsApp does is essentially modernizes that, and also levels the playing field. So when you look at, say, Europe, for example, and France wants to talk to Belgium, right? In Europe, there's an extraordinary cost associated with that because you're crossing a border, and the telecom companies want to charge you for crossing that border. Well, that's the equivalent of asking North Carolina to talk to South Carolina, right? It's like, why should there even be this artificial cost just to go across state borders, right? So in the United States, which is one big homogeneous blob, which isn't fair for me to say, but it is in this way, people are like, well, why don't I just keep using SMS? SMS does what I need it to do, right? Whereas people in Europe are like, sign me up. I can talk to my friends in Switzerland. I can talk to my friends in Belgium. And all of a sudden, it reconnects the world. And so it picks up super fast in continents like Europe. And then, it spreads out virally from there. Eventually, the United States figures it out, right? And our product starts taking off in the United States, and we grow. We do, of course, have more competition in the United States. Facebook has a messenger product as well. But we're also different. Facebook has a product built on the Facebook graph, essentially. Our product is built on the phone number graph. So in many ways, we're complementary to each other as well.
How did you grow so fast, and how did you know that you were growing so fast, given the way you do your invites?
So when we first started going, and I set up some quick stats in 2010, and we were able to track registrations. There were two things that I watched pretty closely. One was registrations, and the other was activity. So if we knew that if activity was growing, that they would reinforce the growth of the network, that it would foster more registrations. And so we would see registrations grow and we would see activity grow. We knew we were healthy. We knew that if we added new features, it would usually increase in activity. If we added new platforms, as we added like Android and Windows Phone, activity would grow and registrations would grow. As we added more languages, activity grew and usage grew. So as we just continue to add more and more capabilities, functions, and accessibilities to our product, we saw the growth metrics take root, essentially.
So talking about adding features, I know that you guys have a certain philosophy about how many things you want to add in versus keep out. Can you talk about that? And is that driven mainly by your co-founder, by you? Do you guys ever disagree about that? And maybe explain to the audience kind of what I'm talking about.
No, actually, I'd say we were actually pretty aligned. Insofar as we're both pretty utility-based or utility-driven. I use the word utility. Utility is what drives our product much more than any other guiding principle. We want to build something that's useful, that helps people communicate, not something that necessarily interferes in their life, but it sort of accentuates their life. So, I don't know, about a year and a half ago or something, I wrote down on a piece of paper, no ads, no games, no gimmicks. Because that was the embodiment, the best embodiment that I could think of in terms of like what we were trying to build. We were trying to build a very simple, straightforward, useful, and again, the emphasis being on utility and usefulness product. And so we're very, very relentless on this, and we're very aligned. Jan and I both agree on this. We're both very aligned on this. We sometimes do disagree. We disagree on what order we should do things in, but we typically agree on what we should do. And that's
how do you end up coming to those decisions?
Some decisions.
Some thrown chairs and.
We've never thrown chairs. We've never thrown punches, which is good. We haggle it out. We sometimes lock ourselves in a room and we just talk it out. And generally, we may be driven in certain directions from different backgrounds. We have very different backgrounds. We have different perceptions, but we work it out in a way that's constructive, and so that we have a mode of operating and moding of going forward. And that's also what's important to us, is being able to go forward and continue to operate, because we're also both pretty execution driven. So we don't want to stall and sort of sit on some decision for 2 years, because if you sit on a decision for 2 years, the world's going to change out from under you.
Yeah, and I know you guys have like a minimal to almost no meeting policy, right? Is that right?
I'd say it's relaxed a little bit. We, for a long time, we had no meetings, yes, and a lot of that you can do because you're small. Unfortunately, these days, some meetings have crept in. We have monthly meetings with our employees. When you get to a certain size, you have to do that, right? Because you can't talk to everyone all at once, or you have rare opportunities to talk to everyone, and so you have to use them and leverage them.
So I'm curious about the early culture that you guys built, and whether or not you were intentionally saying, you sat down and said, okay, this is the kind of company culture we want, or whether it just formed into what it eventually became.
I would say that there was less explicit decision making and more implicit. I would say we wanted to create a good environment that was very tech driven. We wanted to create an environment that was conducive to people working. We wanted to create an environment where people felt comfortable. We also wanted to create a balanced environment. We didn't necessarily, I never wanted people to work 80-hour weeks. And so a lot of our culture was people not working on weekends and people not working late at night. And I always felt bad.
How did you, you always felt bad?
I always felt bad if people ever had to stay late, right? It's like.
So how'd you enforce the people working normal hours, or what would I do with that?
I think I think a lot of people were receptive to the ideas. It's like, hey, this is this is a startup, but it has normal working environment, and people were drawn to it. And some of our earliest recruits were parents with children and things like that, and that actually fit for them and that worked for them. They could actually have normal. Could we enforce it? No. We did occasionally have someone come in on the weekend and work, on the weekend. And I would always tell them it's never expected, but always appreciated, right? I mean, it's always appreciated when people put in extra hours, but it was never expected.
And how did you guys decide on the first employees or the first couple people to bring in? Did you have like some certain hiring process or something specific you were looking for?
The first employees really came out of our extended networks. I was very lucky to reconnect with another Stanford alum. She lived in my sophomore year dorm, ironically, and was one of the first people I met when I came to Stanford. We reconnected and she joined us. Jan found someone that he had worked with from 10 years prior or some number of years prior. I found a former Yahoo that I worked with. So we pulled people from our personal networks that we respected, we knew were smart, we knew were capable. They became our earliest employees. We got one indirectly through a colleague of ours. He worked out very well. So, it was sort of leveraging our extended networks and getting referrals and getting recommendations and being relentless about finding people. I'll be honest with you, finding people and bringing people on board and hiring is extraordinarily hard. And I'll be honest with you also, it's hard even now for us today. We are hiring, just wanted to throw that out there. We're still 60 people, and all of our hiring has been organic. All of our hiring has been,
By organic, you mean people referred in?
By the fact that we never put any huge budget behind it, and we always identified where we needed people and hired in a focused fashion for those people. If you look at some large companies, they'll say, hey, let's launch some new initiative, let's hire 200 people, and it has a very inorganic feel. We've really hired sort of incrementally as we've needed people. It's like, hey, we want to build for the Android platform. Let's hire people that want to work on Android or iPhone or, the web client or whatever. Yeah.
I'm going to introduce a question from QAfounder.center. This is from Laura Locke. She has a question about growth. Apparently, it's a top priority for WhatsApp. What are some potentially viable options for scaling the business globally? Are money transfers, remittances one key option?
So growth for us, there's revenue growth and then there's population growth. We actually have decoupled the two. And so when we look at growth, when you talk about population growth, you really start to talk about different cultures of the world and what gets in the way of people using our product in particular cultures. Does it have something to do with the fact that people don't want to exchange phone numbers? Does it have something to do with they don't want their phone to buzz? And you have to sort of look at each culture of the world differently. What we do is we actually employ people from various parts of the world as part of our customer service team. And that actually helps us learn a lot about different cultures of the world and what's important. I know far more about Ramadan these days than I've ever known. Now on the financial growth side, or on the business growth side, we've taken a very disciplined approach, and a lot of that has been driven by cost control. When you have your costs very well under control, your revenues don't have to be that high to break even. And when you're breaking even, that means you have a thriving business and you have a growing business, an organically growing business. So what we've been able to do is push off some of the growth on the revenue. For example, we don't charge in India. Even though our product is a charged product, we don't necessarily take revenue from India explicitly. And we're able to do that because we have such a low cost structure for what we're doing. And it's worked out quite nicely.
So on the revenue growth side of stuff, I know you guys had kind of a really strong opinion that you wanted to stay as just messaging and none of the other stuff like WeChat and those guys have. What guided the decision to avoid like an API play or kind of a platform play? And like, how'd you end up making that decision?
I wouldn't say that we've completely excluded an API or a platform from our thinking. What I'd say is we've deprioritized it. We've really focused ourselves, and focus being the big F word for us, we've focused ourselves around building a great consumer experience to start with. We certainly get enough people knocking on our door saying, hey, I want an API. But what we also know is that with an API can come spam. And so we're very, very cautious about introducing any third party into our system because we want to be protective of the conversation. We don't want you to start uninstalling WhatsApp because you're starting getting low fares to Hawaii or something. So we want to be very careful about that. And really, this is something that we've potentially put off well into the future. For us, it's building about that great consumer experience first and being focused, right? And I can tell you, it's hard because the world is a very diverse place. Providing good messaging service in Africa is a very different problem than providing a good messaging experience in the United States.
So is that something that's on the horizon, doing more like a WeChat type thing?
Well, WeChat's a very diverse, WeChat line provide very diverse services, ranging from the Snoop robot online to, and that goes back to the gimmickry, right? It's like, who wants a Snoop robot to like talk to? It's like, it's fun for 30 seconds and then you're like, I'm done with this. Sure. So I can do without a Snoop Dogg robot, thank you. So, what we think about is what are the communication products and services that we can provide, and that's what drives us. So, insofar as it's in line with our principal value of utility and usefulness, we'll build it. And voice is a good example, right? Voice generally is useful, and we've announced this, we're going to build it, we plan to roll it out, and because our users also ask for it, and they believe it's useful. But building a hookup service, it's like, ooh, find friends nearby that you can hook up with, not exactly the most useful thing in the world, right? I mean, and that's what sort of drives our thinking.
Here's another question from qa.founder.center. How did it feel when you were acquired, and what were some of the first things you did afterwards?
And you had a baby not too long before that.
I did, yes. I am a new father. I think in some ways being a father actually overshadows it a little bit, just to be really honest. But how did I feel on the day of the acquisition? It hasn't closed yet, so I'll say that. I think there will be, when it closes, there will be a sense of relief. It's like, because between announcing and closing, there's n number of months. I think during that time, more than anything, you're somewhat numb. You're just dumbstruck as to what's going on. You have this flotilla of lawyers around you. And it was a lot of lawyers, I will tell you that. It was essentially 96 hours of being in conference rooms with lawyers nonstop. And so by the end of it, it really is like, it's just crazy. So by the end of it, you're just numb, and you're just trying to sort of grasp it all. And I don't think I really do grasp it all just yet. I think that it will hit me in stages. It's going to change my life. I know that, and I'm looking forward to it, but it also with some apprehension.
So after Facebook had turned you down, how does it feel to be a part of the company, and any thoughts on why that happened and what you're going to do there?
So it is true. I met some great people at Facebook in 2009, in the summer of 2009. And fundamentally, I was not in the right mindset to join Facebook at that time. And, I wasn't the right person for the role that they were seeking. And so, you know, I'm great friends with the people I spoke to, and some of whom were ex-Yahoos and some of whom I just met. So I interviewed on good terms with Facebook, and I'm not bitter about being turned down, which is why I think my tweet was so positively worded. You know, I actually look forward to it. I think that in my interactions with Mark and other Facebook individuals, they get it in the same way that we get it. We might disagree about some topics, but they really understand what social products are like. They understand what communication products are like. They understand issues around privacy, around security. They really understand this world and this space very well. And I find that exciting to work with more people like that.
So meeting Mark Zuckerberg, talk about that.
Well, we had dinner together, and you know, it was it was a great experience. Very bright and capable individual. You know, he's obviously developed a certain degree of cred on his own, and a self-made man. And I think he's also quite insightful and understands the entire spectrum of. He probably understands far more because he's done more with his company than I ever will. I mean, he's been leading some great initiatives, internet.org being one of them. He's been championing immigration in the U.S. Government. I mean, it's just, he's leading a ton of initiatives. I don't know when this guy sleeps, frankly.
How did he reach out to you?
I think this is pretty well documented. He spent some time with Jan at Esther's Bakery down in San Antonio Road. That was when they first met. You know, they had some off and on meetings, but it got real, I should say, you know, in early February when he put a number in front of us and we're like, oh shit, we gotta pay attention to this. So.
Another question here. How will WhatsApp continue to protect users' privacy? This is from Justin Lafferty. What are the biggest concerns after the Facebook WhatsApp deal was announced was the privacy of WhatsApp's users' data? How will WhatsApp protect this now and it's under the Facebook, now that it's under the Facebook umbrella?
Well, I think one of the best aspects of this is that Jan and Mark have agreed to sort of a model of independence in how we operate and own, how Facebook will own and operate WhatsApp. So, you know, we've said this publicly, we've written it on the blog, it's business as usual for us. So it's not like we're going to, on day one, start sending all this data over to Facebook. And by the way, we actually don't have any data. You know, people don't really understand this, but we don't have much beyond a phone number to work with. You don't put, you know, your name, your age, your rank, your serial number, your home address into WhatsApp. You sign up with a telephone number and you go. You might upload a profile photo, you might set a push name, a notification name, but that's about it. So there's actually not a lot of data to share to start with. And so when people get concerned about data sharing with Facebook, there's actually not a lot to be concerned about. And
a lot of what's people have these ideas that you guys are crawling through the messages and learning things about people and
no, we actually we don't have the bandwidth to do it. I mean, we're a small company. We're 30 engineers, 60 people total. For us to go and skulk around people's messages in 40 different foreign languages and try to discern some meaning from them, it's not worth our time. Our value add is providing a stable, reliable, robust communication service. We get out of the way, right? So, if anything, the fact that we have no ambition to do that with messages. It's not in our DNA.
So you'd mentioned that this person that you met your sophomore year ended up joining as one of the first employees. Were there any other people you met at Stanford or any other activities or things that you did that ended up helping you later on in your career or at WhatsApp?
Well, I
or even as an alum involved with Stanford.
Well, I certainly tried to leverage a number of my alumni connections, reached out to some to try to join. Some had jobs, some had families. They're like, no, thank you. Stanford as a recruiting resource has been good to us. We had 2 interns from Stanford last summer. I've done some on-campus speaking engagements as part of the Computer Science Forum. And I think that's been my best relationship with Stanford, is helping us hire. Did I mention we're hiring again? No, seriously, it's the Stanford people. I mean, they're very high caliber, and we know this, and they're some of the most sought after students in the industry. And please come join us.
Here's a product question from Ivan Lee. With competition was heavy not only in the U.S. but worldwide, how do you choose to position yourself in the market, and how do you choose what not to build?
I think positioning. I think we choose to position ourselves around this utility concept. So when you look at areas like Asia, there's some sentimental differences that really manifest. If you look at, say, a product like Line, there's a lot of cute iconography in the product. They have line characters. They put these products, these entities called stickers, into their product. It feels very Asian when you use it. I think what we've tried to do is build something that's more universal, and it has a broad-based utility across all parts of the world. I think that's worked for us successfully in a lot of parts, including the Middle East, including Latin America, South America, and maybe it's hurt us a little bit in Asia, but it also, Hong Kong and Singapore have been some of our best countries in Asia, so it's also helped us in Asia. So we position ourselves differently. We position ourselves as a simple, useful utility. There was a second part to that question.
How do you decide which products not to build?
How not to build. Again, we hold it up to that principle of utility. It's really just that. And when we think about it, it was like, is it broadly useful for a large set of population? Can grandmas in Brazil use it? Can teenagers in the Netherlands use it? And that's what guides us. And if it's not generally or broadly useful, then we're going to decide not to do it.
So I'm curious about how you, coming back to kind of how you build the culture internally at WhatsApp, and there's a lot of people that come out. There's 40,000 companies that have been built out of Stanford, and there's this certain culture that they facilitate and they build when you're in the residential education program as an undergrad. And I'm always curious from Stanford alums if any part of the culture that you learned from Stanford actually impacted how you did things in your company, or the types of people you brought in, or the types of policies you had.
I think a lot of Stanford also resonates. Stanford life and also resonates with Bay Area life, and so we start the day at 10 o'clock, right? We don't start the day at 8 a.m. That's East Coast, right? 8 a.m. East Coast, 10 a.m. California. So I think a lot of sort of Stanford living and Stanford life, it very much maps to what it's like to work in the Bay Area and what it's like to work in tech. And there's a lot of resonance there. So when people make the transition out of education and into industry, it's a pretty smooth transition. There's no culture shock. It's like, oh shit, now I got to put on a suit and tie and go to work at 8 a.m. You don't have to do that. You can show up. You can show up in cargo shorts and a t-shirt just like you do for school. So I think that's been good. Stanford education is top notch. That helps you in industry. Stanford life, I think there's also a culture of camaraderie in the Stanford population, and I think that also translates well into industry, because it creates, not only does it create leaders in industry, but it also creates a great environment of teamwork because of all this camaraderie. So I've had a great experience at Stanford. I met tons of people, and that's extended into the Bay Area and California.
And early, as you're building your company, I'm sure there's tons, you had some industry experience, so you didn't make that many mistakes. But I'm sure that there were a lot of mistakes. So do you have any mistakes that you made that, for the aspiring entrepreneurs out here, you'd want to talk about and tell them advice based on the mistakes you made?
You will make mistakes. You'll make hiring mistakes. You'll make product mistakes. If anything, I'd say one piece of advice is don't get hung up on them, right? Acknowledge your mistakes and move on. We've had all of those things happen to us. what you fundamentally want to be able to do is course correct, and sort of acknowledge and move on, course correct and move on, and by doing that, you'll position yourselves better to move forward and navigate the industry. It's a very tricky and very competitive landscape out there. There's a lot of people vying for top position. We're lucky to be in top position today, but it's a struggle for us to maintain top position. And being able to acknowledge your mistakes and move on is a good way to do it.
Do you have any specific things that you'd want to talk about?
Well, I mentioned Asia before. We're not as successful in China, for example. Was it a mistake to not be successful in China? That's maybe open for debate. I would say I'm a little bit disappointed in, say, Japan and Taiwan, because I think in Japan and Taiwan we could have been more successful with more focus and effort. But you can't dwell on it and you can't over focus on it, because there was probably along those lines 1,000 other decisions that we made. And so if you beat yourself over one particular area, it may come to the detriment of something else. And so that's why I talk a lot about sort of acknowledge and move on. Yeah,
and for a lot of the young companies, hiring and firing as well is a really difficult thing, especially when they're just coming out of school. So it sounds like you did make some hiring mistakes. And can you talk about what you learned from those and how you dealt with them?
We were lucky to position some of them as experimental. We tried really hard to get customer support people in specific languages or areas, and sometimes they just didn't want to do it. And so we would try to fit a round hole into a square peg, or a square peg into a round hole with these individuals. And so they would come in, they would answer customer support email, but we would try to arrange other activities for them to do, other responsibilities, but it wouldn't work out, and then they would end up leaving the company. You learn from it, and so now we're much more focused and just finding people that want to help users in customer support and speak other languages. Engineering-wise, similar. It's like when someone's not working out from an engineering perspective, what you have to do is you have to bite the bullet and manage them out of the organization. We've been lucky, though.
And how did you know when they weren't working out?
You typically know within the first 6 to 12 months, right? The mistakes are too large, there's too many mistakes, or there's too much management that you have to oversee them. You usually know. What I would say, though, is we've been extraordinarily lucky because we've hired some great engineers, and I'd say top-notch world caliber people, and we've held a very high hiring bar in our engineering hiring, and so that's worked out very well for us. Lowering the bar is usually a recipe for disaster. That's usually what I say time and time again.
What do you think of the super high valuations that some tech companies have received in the Valley, and now that you've set the bar for that, how do you feel about that?
Woohoo! Valuations are, there's a certain degree of speculation that goes into valuations. Insofar as the market supports those valuations, I think everyone who's gotten a great valuation deserves it. But I also caution people to understand that valuations are oftentimes temporary. I myself saw Yahoo become a $100 billion company, and then I saw it become a $10 billion company. So, you always have to sort of look at valuations with a grain of salt, and you have to understand that it's a point-in-time measure. It's not a long-term measure. I mean, companies that have been built and have operated for a long time, those are the most successful companies.
Another question from qa.founder.center. When do you anticipate adding or rolling out voice services or calls to users? And that's from Laura Locke.
This year.
Fair enough. Something else we talked about is you guys didn't have that much press and fanfare before this acquisition. Was that an intentional decision, and why was that the case?
It was absolutely intentional. I'd say very early in 2010, when some members of the press started approaching us, we adopted, again, jointly, a very simple strategy, which was let's ignore the press. And it goes back to the big F word, and that's focus. We knew that if we spent more time talking to the press, that we would not be spending time building our product and building a relationship with our customers. So we very deliberately avoided the tech crunches of the world, the tech press of the world, and there was plenty of interest also internationally, and we avoided them as well. This, in fact, is my first speaking engagement ever, right? So we did this very deliberately so that we could focus. And it was only, in the last 6 or 12 months that we've been more present and more available to the press. We did a very brief interview with Wired, and we did a brief interview with Forbes. We really, Jan and I do prefer to just be focused on building our product, building our company, building our service. And avoiding the press has helped us do that.
So your company is based in Mountain View now. A lot of tech companies have gone to San Francisco. Any thoughts about going in that direction at all?
We like Mountain View. We both have sort of emotional ties to Mountain View. Jan has a great story about how he first came to the United States and lived in Mountain View. I myself in college used to go to Castro Street for noodles and Asian food and everything else that Mountain View has to offer. So, and we're 1 block off Castro Street. So, in some ways, Mountain View is our home, and we at least plan to stay there for several years. No plans to move to San Francisco. However, we're very lucky that there's a train that goes up and down the peninsula, and we're 2 blocks from the train station. So we have a number of employees from San Francisco. They get to enjoy San Francisco life, and they just take the train down. We supply everyone with my little internet, what do they call them, MiFis, and they're able to work on the train too. It's a pretty good environment.
What do you wish you would have known before building WhatsApp? Both, let's say, on the business and market side of stuff, but also in just when you're starting a company, there's a lot of the stuff, like you mentioned, a lot of stuff you have to deal with that's outside of product.
I'd certainly wish I'd known more about the law. I mean, there's a lot of employment law. There's a lot of patent law, trademark law. There's just a lot of areas to understand. I had the good fortune of actually taking accounting in college my freshman year, so I had a decent understanding of accounting, and I know how to pay bills, right? So I generally felt good about paying bills and paying taxes and running and operating those parts of the company, but understanding some of the nuances of the law. You can get yourself in trouble sometimes, right? You can't just categorically fire someone sometimes. You have to make sure that you follow a process, for example. Those are good things to know about the law.
Anything about leadership or about raising money or stuff like that?
I'd say from a leadership perspective, I was very, very fortunate to have some great opportunities at Yahoo. I sort of grew up with Yahoo, and I watched Yahoo. When I joined Yahoo, it was 44. I was very early on. When I left Yahoo, it was 15,000. So I got to watch Yahoo grow as a company and grow up as a company, and I also got to be part of the leadership of Yahoo. So I got to learn a lot about leadership and management. But what was the other part?
Well, on the Yahoo point, was there anything that was part of that culture or how people did things there that when you went into WhatsApp, you're like, we are not going to do that, we're going to do it this way?
We wanted even more of a tech agenda. Yahoo always had to carefully balance the media agenda with the tech agenda, and sometimes that would put them at odds with each other. Some of media was just getting content from random places and having to get it into Yahoo. Some of the media was dealing with advertisers, and so we wanted to be more tech driven. So some of our thinking was modeled by companies like Google and their tech agenda, Facebook and their tech agenda. But we also were, I've always been a fan of Craigslist of all things. It's a very simple site, it's very useful.
We just have a few more questions. Here's another one from the site. What's the latest on the formal integration with Facebook? and what has been the most challenging part about WhatsApp's converging with a much larger, high-profile, publicly traded company? From Laura Locke.
The most challenging part is converting to GAAP accounting from cash accounting, if you know what that is. Literally, we had a fleet of auditors come in and audit our financials to basically bring our financials from a cash accounting basis to a GAAP accounting basis. Now, that's a pretty technical statement to say it that way, and it required, frankly, about 20 or so auditors to do it. But, frankly, because of the relationship that we've negotiated with Facebook and maintaining our independence, we don't necessarily look at it from the perspective that we're going to get swallowed by the Borg, right? We look at it as we're going to be fast and nimble and stay independent. And I think Facebook is signed up for that. And the direction that Mark and Cheryl have given us is just focus on growth and engagement. We'll help you with everything else. And to Jan and I, that's music to our ears, because that's what we like to do. We like to focus on growth and engagement. We want to build a better product. We want to get more people using our product.
Why did you decide to go that direction versus further integration into Facebook?
I'd say it's too early to tell. Facebook's graph is slightly different. It's built on different premises. You might exchange phone numbers with very close friends. You might exchange Facebook IDs or friend someone on Facebook in a more casual fashion. You might have, in my case, I have friends on Facebook that I went to high school with, but those people don't have my phone number, right? So it's a different communication model.
But more on the corporate side of stuff, did you, rather than getting kind of more integrated into the Borg per se, you guys, I'm sure, it seemed like you had a pretty strong opinion you wanted to stay independent. And what drove that?
I think we hit a point in our lifetime of the company that we were either going to be acquired or we would have to go public. And going public, being acquired is let's say a 6-month process, for example, with Facebook. Going public is a 18-month process. And there's far more pain in going public. And Mark, by the way, already did it. So kudos to the guy for doing it. I mean, he had the energy to do it. He had the stamina to do it. I don't know if I personally had that stamina. It was going public. You go under so much scrutiny from bankers. You go under so much scrutiny from Wall Street, from auditors and everything else. And what I've been experiencing, I mentioned auditing, and regulatory approvals and everything else, it just gets magnified tenfold. So having the stomach to do that isn't necessarily in my DNA. It's more in my DNA that I want to focus on building that product and building that service. And Mark gave us a great opportunity to do that.
And then, a lot of the young founders, a lot of the mistakes we see them make at StartX is actually choosing the wrong co-founders and working with someone that doesn't really work out, and they end up breaking up, and then eventually get together with someone else, and they do really well. How did you know that Jan was the right guy to build a company with? And was there any advice for these, up-and-coming founders about actually making that relationship work? Because sometimes it's closer than, what we hear at least, it's closer than a marriage.
It is. Jan and I first met in 1997. So we've known each other for a long time. We were good friends. But one story I like to tell is my partner and I we were traveling to Utah, and we had a flight scheduled on some morning. It was a 9 a.m. flight, and I'd called a cab the day before, and unfortunately the cab never showed up. So I picked up the phone. Jan was the first guy I called, and I said, "Hey, oh shit, I need to get to the airport in 30 minutes. Can you help me?" The guy jumped into the car, drove it over to my house. He drove 100 miles an hour to the airport, and we made our flight. So this guy, God damn it, he's someone I can depend on. And I've always been able to depend on him, and he and I. So if anything, we've known since the very beginning that we could depend on each other. Yes, have we argued like a married couple? Yes. But at the end of the day, we work to resolve our issues, and we work to resolve our differences, and we can depend on each other.
What differences do you have, and how does that help?
It's a range. We have different backgrounds. I might be It's funny because sometimes I'm more conservative and he's more aggressive, and vice versa. There's subtle differences. He might want to build a more simple product, and I might want to build a more complex product, right? And he becomes the advocate for simplicity, and so we counterbalance each other in 1,000 different ways, and we focus on making that work. We don't focus on just nitpicking each other to death, because that's where it just breaks down.
Question, do you ever feel that you just got lucky?
Do I ever feel like I got lucky? I feel like the luckiest person in the world every day of my life. I'm lucky to have a great partner in my life. I'm lucky to have a great son in my life, and when I'm talking about a partner, I'm talking about my wife. So, I'm very lucky, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us in this conversation here at StartX. We want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Fenwick & West, for the live stream and the video. You can watch this video on YouTube by 1 a.m. tonight, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the party. We will have 1 hour of tours from now until about 8 o'clock. We ask that you don't take any photos of the upstairs. We're still working on that area. If you're a journalist online, again, we do have photos available. Just get in touch with us and we'll shoot them over to you. Last thing, since Brian plugged it, at StartX, we have lots of jobs. We're hiring. Please go to our website and check out our jobs page. Thank you, everyone.
We're both hiring. Thanks a lot, Brian.